CEO of Sun, had told me this. He would not have built all the hardware, he would not have built all the complex business models if he knew he can sell few keywords that doesn't belong to him and make lots of money. And well, he had not met Gokul, perhaps, right? So very happy to have Gokul here. In fact, if you just go and look at his LinkedIn profile that we had shared, there is no company that he has not worked with, which we are proud of, right? And probably he's the torch bearer for all the most innovative Indians right there in the valley. Super proud of him. At the same time, super humble, right? I had met him around 10 years back, right? So wish I was slightly more smarter to learn how to work with Gokul, right? Here is an opportunity for you guys not to miss this opportunity. We are proud of having you here, Gokul, right? Gokul, just an introduction to what we do. Many people ask me, right? So what we do as CoCreate is we just want to make brightest students in Indian campuses, entrepreneurs who are building global products. That's what we want to do. Many people ask me why you want to do that. I say two things to them. A, go and look at all the startups that you like, whether it's Google or Microsoft or Facebook. All of them got started in campuses of US. Second one, go and look at all the great leaders who build those companies or who are running those companies. All of them are Indians like you, right? So if great companies can come out of campuses and Indians can lead it there, I very well believe that we'll have such case studies even in India, and that's what inspires us to come and do it here. So just a quick introduction to what we do. We have around 26 startups here. Out of 26 startups, 22 are run by students who are still in colleges. These are not the passed out colleges, students. Those who are in 7th or 8th sem or the penultimate year of their engineering. 60% of our entrepreneurs, companies have women as co-founders, and all of them have core innovation, right, as part of their strategy, right? So what we do is we invest in idea stage. We motivate them to come out with the very large problems. Thanks to people like you, will come and inspire them, right? The first thing is to help them think of great problems and great opportunities. Second one, we fund them at the idea stage. And third, we give them support of venture studio, wherein we have dedicated resources of development, design, growth hacking, IP, PR, etc., so that they build their startups in a better way, at faster rate, at a much cheaper price. That's what we do, Gokul, right? So that's what we do here. And again, great to have you here. Welcome on board, and would love to hear from you. Gokul, before even we start, I want to ask you, right? Share some interesting experiences of yours, because you have worked with a lot of students or the young founders in the Valley. Just share some of the very, very interesting experiences you had.
First of all, thank you, Suresh, and thank you, CoCreate team, for having me. And entrepreneurs, it's great to be here. I was an entrepreneur myself for a few years. I worked at Google, and I worked at Facebook, and between those two, I started a company called Chai Labs that was eventually acquired by Facebook. So for about 2.5 years, I ran a company. And so I have, through that experience, I was not a very successful entrepreneur, but I developed a deep respect for entrepreneurs. So it's one of the most noble professions, I think, and one of the hardest, because underneath all the glamour, it's ultimately the grit and grind of every day. And Suresh alluded to something very powerful. You can truly, entrepreneurship is much more about the problem, the customer problem, and ideally a problem that you can't sleep unless you solve. So I always advise entrepreneurs to not really start a company just because they want to, but because there's a certain problem that they see in the world, in their own lives, in customers' lives, that basically that's what keeps them alive. That's what sustains the company through tough times, because there are going to be tough times, ups and downs. So focus on that problem. What is interesting for me about entrepreneurship is just how toy ideas, things that initially seem because the problem doesn't seem big or meaningful or meaty, transforms into something massive, world defining in a few years. For example, I met this guy at Google. He was essentially on our AdSense team, and he would attend all hands. Very smart, thoughtful, quiet young man. and he would ask some questions. I would run the all hands. And then a few years later, I heard that he was starting a company. He was basically, he built this product that was used by a small number of people. They loved it. It was not growing very fast. And then fast forward a few years, it's now Pinterest with Ben Silverman. And basically I'm on the board of the company. And it was so interesting to talk to Ben. He never, for several years, he basically didn't have any financing. It was just him and his co-founder. Even his co-founder, Evan, left the company because he needed a salary and joined Facebook as a designer. So when I joined Facebook, people were like, oh yeah, this guy is the founder of Pinterest. I'm like, why is he at Facebook? It's because no one was willing to give them financing for several years. So he had to leave and join Facebook to basically have a job. And then they raised around after a few years. So ultimately, I think you can't rely on external validators like financing and so on. It's about your understanding, your unique understanding of the customer problem and the customer that truly makes a difference. So I've seen many, many stories like this of, tiny things of people who have gone on to do great things. I think another good example, I think the other interesting thing is founder problem fit. I think I was at Square where we acquired a company called Viewfinder. It's a few folks I used to work with at Google, and they had built a photo sharing app. It became obvious very quickly that photo sharing apps and consumer products were not in their DNA. They were really infrastructure folks, and they were very much into solving how to build databases to store massive amounts of data. And so a couple of years later, they basically said, our heart is not into building payments or other consumer or merchant applications. We want to build infrastructure stuff. So we said you should just leave and go do that. And 5 years later, that company is called Cockroach Labs, or it runs a very large database called CockroachDB. It's valued at 5 billion. And I think I always look back to, you've got to work on problems that you're passionate about. So, these folks are passionate not about application layer stuff, but managing huge amounts of data. And that's what they had spent their lives doing. So they started, the first company they started, Viewfinder, was actually the wrong company for them to start because that was not where their passions were. I think they realized that, and then they corrected it. And the third one, I'll give you another story. I met an entrepreneur in 2010, if I remember correctly. Yeah, he had just sold his company to former company to Hearst. He was a few years ahead of me at IIT Kanpur, and he was trying to figure out what to do next. And he realized that he was actually into fashion quite a bit. And for an Indian man in his 30s to kind of think about women's fashion, that too, was kind of weird and interesting. But he was so passionate about it. He talked. And when I met him the first time, I said, I want to get involved with this company. And that company turned out to be a company called Poshmark. And Poshmark is one of the largest fashion marketplaces in the world today. It's a public company, billion-dollar company. And Manish Chandra was the man. And so it's, again, he was just, I think, hopefully the common thread here is passion, focus on customer problems, believing in yourself, and not waiting, not just because others don't believe doesn't matter. Peter Thiel has said something famously, that entrepreneurship is all about knowing secrets that no one else does. Right? If everyone else knew the secret, then what you're building is not going to be unique or remarkable anymore. So you remember, the secret. You know a secret that no one else does, which is why you started the company. So hold on to that secret, hold on to that problem, and have that guide you. And finally, make sure you're working on something that you enjoy doing. Basically, if you're not excited about that day-to-day, the grind of the day-to-day, ultimately you won't be able to sustain it.
Gokul, brilliant, right? So I know that you have been in the thick of these things. So there is a lot more passion when you talk about these things. But one of the problems that we face, especially, you have also worked with a lot of Indian founders. One of the challenges that we see is, how do you spot the right use case, right? So how do you spot the right use case as a monetization model, right? So in fact, you figured out something amazing in the companies where probably even they were not thinking of, or they're thinking of, right? How do you spot the right use case and monetization models is something which most of our founders struggle with. Any tips around that?
So I think on monetization, let's take monetization first. I strongly believe that monetization comes after engagement. If you have engaged users using you, whether it's for a business app or a consumer app, you can monetize. The one thing we realized with Square, for example, is initially Square was a payments company and payments had okay margins, but the engagement was very strong. It was being used daily by merchants. So that allowed us to build a suite of other products that monetized even more strongly. Square Capital, that was around lending, Square Payroll, Square Instant Deposit, a bunch of products that capitalized on engagement. The same thing was true for Facebook. For Facebook, we didn't monetize the Facebook mobile app for many years, but we made sure that because the mobile app initially was not very good. It was simply the desktop app, which was redone. And so it was not a high-performing native mobile app. So first, we needed to make sure the mobile app was stable, performant, people used it on a daily basis instead of desktop, and it was engaging. And once we did that, then we monetized it, it became easy. So focus always on engagement first before you monetize. In other words, I would say retention before monetization. Now, how do you find the right use case? There are two ways to do it. I think identifying the problem. Suresh, you said something again very interesting when you were introducing the session, is problems and opportunities. Remember, there are two things. One is customer problems. So you've got to figure out what customer problems matter. Many entrepreneurs make the mistake of, when they go and interview customers and talk to customers, they make the mistake of asking, well, here's the problem we're working on. Is that an interesting problem? And customers will always say, yeah, that sounds interesting. But the more important thing to understand is this a hair on fire problem for the customer? Is it a burning problem? So the right question to ask your potential customer is, what are the top 3 things that you're worried about that can't get you to sleep at night? And if what you're working on, the customer problem, is not one of those top 3 things, or maybe even top 2 things, it's not something that your customers are going to care about. So I think you got to really understand what are the top 2 or 3 things your customers are facing, and try to solve one of those top 2 or 3 things. And customer interviews, therefore, are the lifeblood of any company. Even as a company keeps growing, one of the most important best practices of product development is to, on a weekly basis, talk to at least 2 or 3 customers. And ideally, every member of the team talks to 1 or 2 customers, at least listens in. And these are not just customers that are current customers. These can be potential customers who might want to be customers, or churn customers who were once customers but have left your service, or maybe loyal customers. So there are many different segments of customers. So every week, try to talk to a different segment to better understand how they're using your product, what their problems are, why they churn from your product, what they're using today. And you always start. The other tip I have for you is, when you try to ask customers what their problems are, they may not even be able to articulate what their problems are, because how do they know? So what you want to try to get them to talk about is in story form, just like Suresh asked me for stories. Ask them to tell you, can you tell me about the last time you did an expense report for your company? Or tell me about the last time you managed a procurement product for your company, or you procured a product and service, whatever the problem spaces that you're in. People always remember what they did and how they did it the last time. And as they go through that story, ask them questions. Okay, how did you start? Why did you go to this service? Why did you go to their page? What did you do next? And that's how it helps you uncover what is interesting about that. Was that painful? Was that good? So getting them to tell the story will naturally elicit problem points from that narration, which then you can hopefully get deeper into and try to understand where you can be remarkable and different and what problem you can solve. So get your customers to tell you stories. Everyone loves telling stories. Everyone loves talking about how they did a certain thing. So focus on getting them to, so instead of trying to, because it's an abstract question to say, what's your problem, right? Even that, what I asked, they don't know. They don't know what the top 3 problems are. But
And
you can ask them what different things they
in
did.
a better position.
Exactly. So those are my tips. I think customer interviews are lifeblood. So I think I've seen now people talk to 100 customers, and then basically I think, but 100 customers, but talk to them superficially and miss the point, because they missed the point of what the problem was, and they didn't truly solve the problem because they didn't get to the one. They just asked high-level questions. So it's not just about talking to, it's not quantity, it's quality of conversation, going deep, getting the terms, tell stories, truly understanding what the day-to-day looks like, so you can truly identify the core problem, the deep problem, not the surface level problem, and solve it.
Friends, again, let me repeat, right? When Gokul says this has got that much more weight, because he has solve this each and every time that he wanted to solve it, right? So please take his words very, very seriously, right? And these are amazing input. But Gokul, okay, I mean, just an extension of that. One of the challenges that normally the entrepreneurs make, right? I mean, especially the Indian entrepreneurs make is the what we call as feature creep, right? So just add, you can't have one business model or you can't have one feature that we like. So I will add more, right? So I always tell them you are as big as the smallest business model that you have, right? So that's the challenge. But tell me, as a more wearing more of your product hat, right? What features you drop as a founder, considering balancing act that you need to do? You need to focus on some innovation. You need to focus on telling the next story to investors. At the same time, you need to appeal to you need to get metrics from the customer. So, what are the features that you drop as a product manager?
Excellent, excellent question, Suresh. I can go on for hours about this. You're absolutely right. Many companies, even small companies, become feature factories, I call them, where they churn out feature after feature after feature without truly understanding whether the feature affects customer behavior. Let's take a step back. Every feature of every product, what is the ultimate goal of the feature? It is to change customer behavior in a way that drives business outcomes. Let's repeat that. It's to change customer behavior. If a feature doesn't lead to a change in customer behavior, that feature is as good as not existing or not being useful or not being helpful. And why is customer? What are some examples of customer behaviors? An example of customer behavior is someone who was not a customer becoming a customer. Someone who was a customer who used you 2 times a month, using you 10 times a month. Someone who was a customer who sent 15 messages a day, now sending 200 messages a day. So customers, ultimately, business value, which is things like a business outcome, which is things like revenue, profit, etc., only come when customers change behavior in a favorable way towards you, right? So ultimately, the goal of every feature, every product is to change customer behavior. So what we need to understand as companies, as startups, as entrepreneurs, is what customer behavior this feature is going to change. And if you can't articulate that, you've got to cut it out. You can't even launch it. So the first rule you should ask yourself before you launch a single feature, any feature, is this going to change a customer behavior? And if so, what? And you should use a similar eye to look at all the features you've launched and see, did it actually change any customer behavior having this button or having this feature? Are customers doing something differently as a result of this? And if you can't identify it, try to go and talk to some customers to understand, are they using it? If you can't, ideally you should have asked this question before you launched this feature and before you even did any work on it. Because remember, your time and your attention, you're a startup. You only have a small number of people. Their time, their attention is the most valuable thing you have. And if it's divided into doing hundreds of features or even dozens of features, that's time poorly spent. Most great companies have a very simple product initially that solves a very specific problem extremely well and solves most other problems not at all, or doesn't solve other problems. So you can become a very, very big company with a very simple product. I think an over-engineered or over-feature-rich product is a sign that you probably don't have product market fit or that you're not solving a customer problem really well. At Square, we actually came up with the title, instead of calling someone product manager, we call them product editor. Why? An editor's job, if you think of a newspaper or a magazine, is to cut out things, right? Writers submit huge things and editors will edit things. The product manager's job, and in the case of young companies, you, the entrepreneur, are the product manager, is to edit features out, because the best products are the simplest to use. You want products that are self-serve, that someone can just download an app, even for a business, from the App Store and start using it. Think about a point of sale. Many of you might not have used a point of sale, but a point of sale is in the US, a point of sale is this complex beast where there are training videos. You have to train the cashier or the baristas to how to use it. Square built a point of sale that you can download from the App Store, like a consumer app, and use it. You can't do that if you make it at all complex, because you're running a business with this thing. And so you got to make it so brain dead simple that you just launch it, this is how you use it. Okay, super easy. So think about a lens I would use is, can someone use your product? Can someone download your product or go to your website and use it without ever asking you for help? Can one of your parents If you send them to the website, can they use it? Do they know what the hell it does? Can they use it without ever talking to you to understand what it is? So the parent test is a good one. Can someone who's one generation before us use the product? Or maybe someone who's 10 years old, can you tell a teenager to go and use the product, and can they just download it like Snapchat or Pinterest or something and start using it? So you got to make it drop dead simple, and more features are the enemy of it. But ultimately, the key asset test is, does it change customer behavior? If it doesn't, it should not be in your product.
Right. So that's a excellent point, Gokul. Thanks a ton for saying this, because that's one of the challenges that we face with all the founders. But before I hand it over to others, I just have one more question. Then I will pass it on to the founders or this one, right? So in the journey of customers, in terms of features, there is always a challenge in terms of whether to build it as core to my product, or just call an API or embed some other product into my system, right? So let's assume the integrating the external product may affect your user experience by 5%, right? So this one, right? What is your recommendation, right? Is it build or buy or reuse, right? What do you recommend in such scenarios?
Awesome question. It all comes down to, what is your core value to the customer? You've got to focus on building things that are the core value. If you've already proven out your hypothesis around customers and you have clear product market fit, and you've spent all your, so TLDR, to get to the answer first, I would always outsource the non-core things and slowly over time build them once my company is at a point where I feel I can build them and I need to extract margin out of the business. But even with, for example, payments is a good example. DoorDash is probably Stripe's largest customer in the world today, either top one or top two. We do about 40 or 50 billion annualized, and most of it goes to Stripe. And we could, in theory, have built payments, because 40 or 50 billion is a big payments business. So in theory, we could have built payments ourselves. But we chose to partner with Stripe. Why? Because it's not core to our business. Our customer doesn't care whether we are doing payments with Stripe or Braintree or PayPal or Square or someone else. It doesn't matter. And through commercial, because as we grew, we could negotiate more and more favorable agreements with Stripe, equal. And basically, we told Stripe, look, we could build it, but if you give us this rate, then it makes sense for us not to build it. So we were able to squeeze better and better rates as we grow. And so that's, I think, a 5% degradation user experience is also accepted. Now, user experience is an interesting thing. If the user experience, 5% user experience, is around the aspect that makes you truly unique or remarkable, then you might want to consider building it. But speed to market is also important, because if it actually slows you down by 6 months to build this thing, then you probably have to still consider partnering and using the API, and then make up the remaining 5% after you use it. Because number one enemy for every startup is time. Time, because customers have other choices. There are other companies who are going to be doing what you're doing. Ultimately, even your ability to retain talent, if you're not going to be able to get a product out there and show that it's used by customers, it's going to be low, because your best employees are going to leave for somewhere else. So in order to, remember, you have a ticking clock. You have a ticking clock. And that means that you got to get to market. You got to test out your customer hypothesis ASAP. So the number one thing, I mean, Square, for example, when we launched, our reporting was really crappy. Many things were crappy. That was okay. Why? Because the number one thing we wanted to test was, will a simple, drop dead simple payment hardware product, which couples with your iPhone or Android phone, be able to be, will it be compelling to customers? And that was the key value prop. Everything else we were able to do, we were okay with doing a poor job at, because you can build those over time. But you got to, what is the primary problem you're solving? You've got to be excellent at that. And you got to get it out to the market really fast. Everything else you can hold off till later. Margin, user experience in those dimensions, etc. So you got to get to market fast.
Right. Excellent. Thanks, Gokul. Vanya, you wanted to ask a question to Gokul?
Yeah. So, hi, Mr. Gokul. I'm Vanya, one of the co-founders of a company called Frizzle Weather, which is essentially a hyperlocal weather intelligence platform that helps businesses leverage, weather forecasts and insights in order to drive better decision-making on the mission-critical aspects of their decisions. So my first question to you was, since you're currently working at DoorDash, Have you ever seen, weather play a role in your operations? And do you think a service where hyperlocal weather is provided would make sense or add value to DoorDash?
It could. I think if we didn't have, I think first of all, Vanya, I think great to meet. And I think weather intelligence or intelligence about, especially when weather conditions are changing really fast, is a pretty powerful thing if you can actually get accurate data. I think the reason weather is important to food delivery or any delivery service is because it really impacts it impacts two things. One, customers going into store or not. So customers go into stores typically or go into restaurants when it's nice weather outside, and they stay at home when it's rainy or bad weather. And second, drivers don't come out if the weather is bad. Generally, your incentives have to be much higher, and incentives have to be set in advance, because if you do too much real time, if you already decided you're going to stay at home, it's very hard to incentivize people to go out to drive. And so you've got to at least have a few hours buffer. At 8 p.m., you can't just say, well, start driving. If you can't just say at 7:30 p.m. if you expect your most of the orders to come at 8 and need more drivers at 8. You got to do it at 5 o'clock, at least 3 hours in advance. So I think the question is, the big question for me is, what are the alternatives, right? I think if there are other alternatives that provide us weather information, there are alternatives, of course, there's AccuWeather and so on. So the question is, and obviously it's hard to discuss over the Zoom, but how much better are you on the dimensions that matter? Because for us, it's not the intensity of weather, and it's not really it's too hard to do planning at the very, very hyper local level. What we need is at the city level or at a metro level, because it's very hard for us to say, well, in this neighborhood, different weather pattern versus this part of the city. So as long as we get city level, and also we don't need too fine-grained, we just need to understand how much rain is going to be there, what the temperature is going to be there. So combination of rain and temperature. And if so, I think the question is, I don't know what the answer is. What are the services are there? That it's always about sophisticated customers, always look to see what else is out there. So the question is, how are you better from what else is out there? So TLDR, yes, it is valuable. It's valuable at the temperature, at a macro temperature and precipitation level, and at a metro level. Big question for me, what are the other options out there? And how much better are you along those dimensions compared to those options?
Excellent.
Great. Yeah, I think that answered my question pretty well. So another question I had was, since you're like the brain behind AdSense, and have you ever worked with weather-based ad targeting, and which industries do you think it would actually make a significant impact in?
Weather-based ad targeting is used, I think, ironically, the food delivery itself uses weather-based ad targeting. For example, we do ramp up ad spend when we know it's going to be raining. So you're right. I mean, even on the marketing side, knowledge of weather is actually really, really powerful. It's not as sophisticated as it should be, because it's not as API driven, because I think the major ad platforms do have it, but they don't have it as well. And agencies are not as sophisticated about it. But I think whichever business, just think first principles about businesses that are affected by the weather. And those are the exact same businesses that will also use advertising, because ultimately those businesses will up or lower their ad spend based on the weather, because the business is affected by the weather. So just think first principles, go back to look at every category. And so the same categories of business, the movie theaters, the golf courses, all of those folks are affected by the weather, and they're the ones who are going to be ramping up. The one interesting thing, one of my friends started a company called Climate Corporation many years ago, which was a weather prediction service. They realized that it was hard for them to sell to the standard businesses, just because it was something that these businesses cared about, but it was just hard for them. They didn't live. You want something that's a burning thing. In other words, a movie theater owner doesn't wake up in the morning thinking, what is weather? Weather is important, but it's not something they obsess about day in and day out. A lot of their focus is on what movies am I showing, what concessions am I selling, etc. The one segment that cares deeply about weather was farmers. They literally live and die based on the weather. So he pivoted the company. He spent 3 years trying to sell to golf courses, tennis courses, movie theaters, all of these folks. And it was just challenging. Whether he sold weather insurance more than anything else, but ultimately realized that, and so weather insurance or weather financial products proved to be a very compelling proposition. So insure someone against weather. Weather insurance worked really well for farmers, and that just changed the trajectory of the business. Because ultimately the problem, that's what we mentioned earlier, it was a good problem. It was something they thought about, but not literally I would die. I mean, my business would literally die if the weather is bad. And that's farmers really. Farmers cared about weather massively, 10x more than any other space. So you need to find someone who cares about the problem you're solving. It's not a tangential thing. So I think food delivery cares, but there's not that many food delivery players. That's a problem. You want a space where there's lots of customers and they care deeply about the problem. If there's a small number of customers that care deeply, that's not going to be a compelling business. Or if there's a large number who care somewhat, but not enough, that's also not going to be. You want on the axis of care, high care and low care, and many players versus less players, you want the top right quadrant of lots of players and deeply care about this. This is the top three things. You can ask a farmer what are the top three things. I promise you weather is going to be one of the top three things there. So you want that. If you ask a movie theater owner, that's what I said, right? You've got to ask them, is weather something they care about without ever mentioning weather? What are your top three things? If they don't mention weather, it's not something, it's going to be hard to sell a weather-based product to them.
Talking about farmers,
Yeah, hello, Gokul. First of all, this was some really great insights. Much thanks for that. I have a company-specific question. I'm a founder of Rainifly. We are an agri-tech company, basically. Let me give you a small introduction as to what we are doing. We are majorly focused on ML and computer vision, developing a predictive model as to how your crops would turn out to be, or what kind of infections or infestations are on the way.
Well, you could use Vanya's weather product to hopefully make that prediction better.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking right now. Maybe use her as well, and then maybe integrate. So yeah. So like I said, the based on that, the farmers can bring in the necessary changes and have an optimum yield, or prevent the crops from being damaged or something like that. And along with that, we'll be having a historical analysis as well. So with this, we'll be having drone technology for crop spraying, crop health monitoring, and other entities as well. So one important question which I had was, how do we deploy our model? Like, what do you think would be a great business model for our thing? Because the end users are very challenging. That like the farmers, because they're really hard to convince. Because when we did our customer survey, basically, and when we spoke to several farmers, the cost of the service is also a major factor for us. So what do you think would be a great approach for it, so that we can outshine the other competitors, whatever is there? Because when we did other survey as well, one of the major factor was the marketing aspect itself. The other companies, I mean, in India, the precision farming is not much of a success because of the marketing, like whatever companies is present right now. So what do you think would be a great approach for this?
Well, the one thing you mentioned that worried me a little bit is you mentioned the cost of the service is very high.
No, we wouldn't be selling our product to them. We'll be providing it as a service.
So but you're saying the cost is really high to the end farmer, however they use it. Is the cost really high compared to the benefit they're going to get? Is what you meant?
No.
So tell me more about the cost of the how do the farmers get charged for this?
We will be charging them based on acres. Like say 1 acre will be having around 1.2 to 2K per acre. Yeah, based on the whole crop monitoring and the pesticide spraying as well.
Here's the challenge. So I think you're trying to charge a fixed amount per acre, while the farmer's output from the acre is variable, right?
Correct,
I think the one thing you realize selling to small businesses or sole proprietor businesses, they're inherently suspicious of everyone. You saw this at Square. If you try to sell them a marketing service and you charge them a pure subscription service, they're going to be like, hang on, I don't even know if I'm making that much money to cover this amount. So I think what you need to change is your fundamental pricing model, where maybe you've already done that, where you almost, it's a percentage of the improvement you're providing in their sales that you take. So you're almost guaranteeing that they're going to improve their sales or improve whatever metric they care about. And you take a percentage. That appeals to everyone, right? You put $1 with me, I will give you $2. I guarantee you $2. And if you don't, you can terminate me. And I think that kind of stuff automatically sells itself, I promise you. We saw this at DoorDash, where we have an advertising product. At both Google and Facebook, we could never make ad products work for restaurants. Never. Restaurants Because paying a cost per click, what does a cost per click mean to a restaurant? What can they do? So massive churn. This is the two biggest ad platforms in the world ever. Neither of them, restaurants never stuck around. DoorDash, because we can take the ad and we can direct it back into DoorDash to drive sales. We only charge them based on sales. Incredible adoption in 4 months since we launched it. I think we'll have within the end of the year more restaurants using ads than ever use ads on Google and Facebook. And so I think you've got to change the pricing model to be success-based, whatever success means for the farmer. And you've got to show them that, go ahead. Sorry, you might already be doing that.
So like we had this plan that we give at least say like 5 to 6 months, we give them along with the service a complimentary offer, maybe have a service reduced cost. And then when they see the result, when they're happy with it, then we like give our usual subscription fee. So wouldn't that be like
a subscription fee in the first place? Because they're still suspicious, right? Whatever you do, the reality is anything that's a fixed fee, sole proprietors, because no one's looking out for them. The system is going to screw them. They know this. They've been screwed so many times by the system that they are naturally suspicious of anything and everything, any third party. Think about all the movies we've seen about farmers being exploited, right? This is reality.
Yeah.
They have been exploited by the system, by everyone around them. They don't trust anyone. So you need to you need to change your pricing model fundamentally, not just for a trial period, but because they know they've been exploited too many times with people who've been giving them low interest rates and the interest rate jack up. They know that people are out to screw them. So you need to change your pricing model to something that is aligned with their success. And then because they're so suspicious, you need to find someone who they trust. Either it has to be at the panchayat level. I don't know what it is. You have to convince the village elders almost that this is the right thing and the pricing supports it. And by doing this, they will literally improve their acreage. And you have to find the trusted voices. Ultimately, trust matters here. So you've got to find, I don't know who they trust, but obviously they don't trust a tech company. They won't, it's hard. And so either you have to go after the big farmers. So two ways, right? You don't go after the small farmers. You go after the bigger farmers, right? There are segments of farmers who are much, much bigger and they're more sophisticated. They run it like an enterprise, etc. You start with them, and then they're the beacon farmers. If they use them, then hopefully the other ones see that they're using them and they'll start using them. And you can show success stories. Or to reach the smaller ones, it's also going to be not effective for you to sell to them directly. So you've got to find scalable ways to reach large numbers of farmers through channels they trust. It could be at the village level, where you reach all farmers in a village by doing a village-based program or something like that. And you have a common point, the panchayat or someone where all of them come. But I don't know the structural aspect of it. But I think from all that I've seen with small businesses, and these are small business sole proprietors, your pricing model, you've got to think about your pricing model, rethink your pricing model. It cannot be a flat fee. These guys have been screwed too many times. They're inherently suspicious of everything that's a flat fee.
Correct. Okay.
Excellent. Shashank or Partana, you guys want to go?
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir, sure. I'd love to go next. Hello, Mr. Gokul. Very nice to meet you. It was a wonderful. Thank you for being here. So I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Team Up. Right, we are a company which helps people to go ahead and create teams. Right? In every single domain, we keep seeing the same issue that people are not being able to bring together the right people, and because of which there's always this loop which goes ahead and destroys products, destroys startups, destroys all of these different projects or anything that could happen over the course of time. Right? We go ahead and achieve this by leveraging various factors such as psychometric analysis and skill set based matching and role based matching, and that helps people to arrive, users to arrive at the best chemistry fit for their teams. Right. So my first question is that. It's more of a general question towards B2C inclined companies. What do you think are the best indicators of a good scalable revenue model, especially in the B2C market, which technically, frankly speaking, our platform relies heavily on user generated content, right? And in such kind of scenarios, what do you see as a very good model for, or a very good model for monetization? And what do you think are the good key indicators for?
There are three ways to monetize consumer products: advertising, subscriptions, or transactions. Advertising works, I think, when you have, and Suresh has worked in ad businesses, and I have too, when you have literally the scale is mind-boggling. I think if you have 1 million users, it's not enough. If you have 10 million, it's not enough. 100 million, maybe you start building something interesting. I think, and especially depends on which geography, right? 100 million users in India versus 100 million users in US could be different, but you need tens of millions of folks. Subscription and transaction are probably the best models for companies that are not going to reach 100 million plus monthly active users. So I think you've got to figure out, again, I think for subscription, I would say the best leading indicator is whether enough people are using your product for free, and then you can introduce a paid tier. And paid tiers typically, or paid tier, I believe in I believe in models that have a perpetually free tier, and then you slowly, as people use it, they start getting addicted to it. Hopefully, use it more and more, and then you introduce a paid tier, which makes, for example, some parts of the product, or as the power users, those parts of the product available for the paid. But the free then gives you a way to acquire customers easily, because I've seen time and again, there is no more powerful one-letter word that helps acquire customers than the word free. Across countries, across age groups, across demographics, the word free, and we've tested all kinds of stuff. We literally at DoorDash, we would say take $5 off versus free delivery. And delivery is only $2 or $3. So actually free delivery is a much worse offer than $5 off. Free delivery always outperforms $5 off, which is crazy. But crazy in logical sense, but that's what, there's a deep-seated human need to get something for free. And so I think of offering the team building product for free. And I promise you, you don't need to worry too much about monetization. Like we said early on, focus on driving engagement. You'll be able to, there's enough investors who understand this. You'll be able to, if you can drive engagement and love for the product, where people are referring the product to others, where people are engaged, where you're able to acquire customers easily because of this free content, and they are staying and using it constantly, they're coming back again and again and using it, and that acquisition is doing well, retention is doing well, monetization can be 1 or 2 rounds down the road. There's enough companies I've seen now where they have deferred monetization because acquisition engagement is going so well that that's what you should focus on. Contrary, if you monetize too early, you divert your focus from acquisition and engagement, and you just get focused, and then VCs and investors and even you start focusing too much on making money versus on building a massive engaged audience, which is what, yeah.
Right. Wonderful. Just a follow-up question on the same thing regarding engagement itself, right? So, what do you think are the best ways to encourage people to, go ahead and generate more content on our platform? Like, there are obviously a lot of generic ideas that come out, but in today's settings, given that there are so many options that are available, right? Are there any key secrets or key engagement things we can go ahead and focus on?
Well, it has to be based on what they want to accomplish with your platform. So whatever the primary value proposition of your platform is, if by generating content, they can accomplish that better, then they'll generate more content. So what you need to show them is if they generate content, they can build a better team. And if you can if you can prove that that is the case, for example, many social networks are about vanity and ego, right? That's why the like button was invented in the first place. The love button, whatever it's called now.
Yeah.
And so people got, we all got conditioned that the more content we generate, the more likes we can get, the more followers we can get, the more our status will be. So content became a way to create more status. So you need to understand what is driving people to join the platform in the first place. And you need to, in the product, build ways that after you generate content, it helps you maybe attract people, maybe people who generate more content. It's easier for them to find new team members or whatever the case may be. So you need to think about the primary reason they're joining it, and content should be, if you generate content, I'll give you a good example. I'm a board member at a company called Course Hero. Course Hero is a subscription platform for college students. It's basically, and what they do is you have a subscription, you pay about $100 a year, but you can not pay subscription if you generate content or upload content. And so you basically, by uploading content, your tests, your papers, etc., you basically don't have to pay a subscription. So they have a constant steady stream of content coming in because huge chunk of folks don't want to pay subscription fees. So you're literally giving them value because then they can use the product for free by uploading their own content.
That's wonderful. So one final question. So what metrics would you use to identify if your free users are willing to move to a paid subscription model? What metrics would you?
Good news is that you don't need to, you basically need to understand what access you're going to charge based on. For example, if you have, if you have a task management, I'm using this task management product, or they basically say up to 5 tasks, it's free. And you didn't even mention this. So you just kind of start creating tasks. And when you try to create the 6th task, because you get addicted, you create the first task, you do it, oh yeah, this is a cool product, workflow product. And the 6th one, they're like, well, actually, you reached the limit. The 6th one, you have to pay. And I'm like, shit, okay, I'm already using it, I'm already engaged, I'll just pay, So that, I think in some ways, you basically start testing at different levels. And then if you almost even don't need to charge them, right? You can just run this experiment at different times where you can say, well, you're going to have to pay. And if they click yes, then you can say, okay, we're going to start the payments product in like a few months. We're giving you a free trial of it or something. And if they say no, that they're not willing to pay at that point. So you probably need to set the bar higher or wait for a different metric. So it's a good way to test without actually building any monetization, but just trying to put in different blockers or different things to test hypotheses for a different percentage of users.
Thank you so much.
Shashank will not leave you, Gokul. He will go on and on. So I have to.
Great questions. All 3, Vanya, Ajay, and Shashank have asked great questions. So it's been
Gokul, one question, right? So one of the challenge that we have, and we especially work in the colleges, is at least 30-40% of the ideas will have a hardware component, right? So because for many reasons, sometimes it just improves the whole value proposition of the product. Sometimes it's necessary stuff because you have also ran Square. And I'm asking, right? How do you position hardware? Because both of us know that no investor likes hardware, right? So hardware, especially the India. So how do you position hardware?
I used to think of hardware as a bad thing before joining Square. And it is that hardware can be really powerful because software products are generally easier to rip and replace. Hardware products give you a true physical footprint into the customer, which makes it much harder to replace. So the way to position hardware is as a conduit, as a stickiness enhancing device, no pun intended, it's actually a device, stickiness enhancing way to drive a conduit of recurring revenue. So ideally, it's basically a way to drive enhanced stickiness compared to a pure software only product. But I think investors ironically like products where you're not making money off the hardware. So you're either giving the hardware for free or giving the hardware you're selling it at a price less than the cost, because that forces you to make money off the service you're delivering through the hardware. So hardware is essentially a conduit for delivering some software service, whether it's a DVR box, it delivers from our cable companies, it delivers like content and we pay a recurring fee to, or in the case of phone companies, in case of Apple is probably the one hardware company in the world that can make money off of hardware. I think everybody else uses hardware, even Google uses hardware to essentially sell other products and services, to sell Android or Chrome or something else, Google search, etc. So I think the way to position hardware is, it's a way to deliver, it's a conduit to deliver the software service. And it's essential and helps make it more sticky.
Okay, I mean, that brings Prarthana, please go ahead. Okay, and they're building something very, very interesting. Okay, we should hear from Prarthana.
Hi, so I'm Prarthana. I'm one of the co-founders of Font. So great insight so far. So basically what we do is we make smart pet wearables, which will give insights on, the overall pet's health, activity and temperature to the pet parent. And this can enable pet parents to make better decisions for their pets. So my question to you is basically to follow up on what you just told previously, is what factors do you consider while pricing your hardware product? You ideally want to price it low, but however you do have a lot of costs involved in it. So what factors do you consider while choosing the right business model and the right your pricing model for it?
It's a great question. Pratha, I'll connect you to a company I'm an investor in called FI. They basically are a pet tracker. And they were a pure hardware pricing. They were a pure hardware product for several years, for 2 or 3 years, basically, till they got enough. They wanted the best hardware. And so they basically priced almost at cost, essentially, slightly more than cost, because they didn't know. I think it depends on how confident you are of the subscription model. Okay. And so they basically were not confident for a while that people would pay for a subscription for basically pet tracking. For them, it's tracking where the pet is, GPS tracking, etc. And so if you're confident that subscription is going to work, then you lower the price. So once they launched their subscription, they saw the attach rate for subscriptions is very high. And so they started lowering the price of the hardware. And so now the hardware is sold at lower than cost. But for the first couple of years, they were not sure if the subscription would even take off. So they had to, because you can't have a sustainable business selling something for less than what you're making it, especially if you have no other revenue stream on the other side. So they basically priced it at premium prices. And then but then you have to justify the premium. And pet parents, like I think someone told me that there are three categories of people who spend the most money: parents of human kids, pet parents or pet owners, and golfers. And so I'm two of, I have a pet and I'm a parent. Thankfully, I'm not a golfer. But in general, I think people who own pets are generally fairly inelastic. I mean, you can actually charge them almost anything. And that's what I saw with fee. And then, but there is, I mean, there are, to be a mass market product, to get to more people, lowering price obviously helps. So one subscription, I think, so the question for you is, how powerful is subscription? What is the attach rate of subscription going to be? If you think 100% subscription, then of course you can do the math and they charge the minimum possible. But if you think subscription is only going to be 20%, then you've got to charge the product appropriately. So that's the thing. We don't have the data yet. So the question is, you can either go the safe route, or you can say, listen, I'm going to produce 500 and just give them away to start with, even at low cost. And then I'm going to start seeing how many people are subscribing and staying on, and use that to get data on what my next set of how I should tweak pricing. The good news is you can keep tweaking pricing, as Fee has shown me. Every batch, they basically see how the subscription rates are going and keep tweaking pricing up and down based on subscription data.
Right. So Gokul, one question, because you said whenever there is an introduction, right? So because this is something very, how do founders, right? How should they prepare themselves for partnering with the larger companies, Gokul, right? So this discussion came up multiple times, but it's not very easy for startup to, both in terms of their confidence and also in terms of the value proposition, get it right for working with the larger companies, right? Or what are your suggestions? Because you have many such relationships.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to know is what you can offer to the larger company and what the larger company can offer to you. So I think when you go into a conversation, you can't just say, well, I think you need to have a very clear understanding of what assets you need, what assets of the larger company could be helpful to you. It could be distribution, it could be a certain partnership, it could be access to customers. What is it? And the more tactically, your product much better than the larger company does. So the more tactical you can be around saying, hey, it could be an integration with the Chrome homepage or whatever it is, that could be powerful for me because XYZ. But then you also have to understand what is a larger company's business model, or what is what is driving them, and how can you help them achieve their goals, right? So you can't obviously tell, when you talk to them, all of the focus has to be around how you can help the larger company achieve their goals. But then when you think about how you position it, it has to be around how they can help you achieve your goals. But you've got to understand both sides. And so I think the number one mistake that folks make is they don't really understand what the larger company's goals are. So they go in making it all about me, versus about them. It's all about them. It's about them, right? Because the person you're talking to, the larger company, they're focused on their job and how to accomplish their job. You've got to figure out what matters to them. And you've got to figure out how your product can help them. And hopefully you do it in a way that partnership then helps you, of course.
Gokul, you spoke about some of the mistakes, right? But tell me one or two common mistakes that student founders or the younger founders make, either in terms of pitching an idea or wanting to partnership. What are some of the real challenges that you have seen, right? As an investor or as someone who's mentoring a lot of students?
I think one of the biggest mistakes they make is they essentially, I think on the co-founder front, which is they get their friends, just their dorm mates or college buddies to be the co-founders without really sensing, is this the right founding team? The right founding team matters a lot. And typically founders you need to have a founder who's very focused on go-to-market, and like the business side, and a founder who's very focused on building. I think if you have 4 or 5 founders, all of whom are kind of very similar to each other, that's not a diverse founding team, and it's not going to lead to good outcomes. I think the number one mistake you make, and the number one reason for startup failure in the very early days, is founder breakup. And founder breakups happen for many reasons, but it's because it's also friendships get destroyed because of that. So I think number one thing I would advise student founders is, please be careful. Just because you are roommates with your friend doesn't mean they should be a co-founder. Got to make sure you basically choose your co-founder very carefully. That's the number one mistake. The number two mistake, I think, is basically not focusing, just thinking of ideas versus problems, and really making sure you're solving a problem. And so do a company. I mean, look, I think it's fun to create cool companies just for courses and classwork. There's lots of entrepreneurship courses, but if you want to create a real company, it has to be tackling a real problem. So make sure you're tackling a problem worth solving, a hair on fire problem for a customer that you understand deeply. We're talking to customers, and don't just because you feel you've read about a problem somewhere, you start a company based on that. That's not the right way to do it. You've got to do customer research by talking to customers and truly understanding what do they care about, what's in their mind. Because that problem, those customer interviews are what are going to guide you. And so those are the top 2 things. I think just because you have a cool idea doesn't mean it's a company. And just because your roommate is a cool person and a good friend doesn't mean they're a good co-founder. And third, have a couple of mentors that you trust. Folks like CoCreate, folks like Suresh. I think you need mentors who you can trust, trustworthy mentors.
Thanks a lot, Gokul. I know that you have a hard stop at 9:30 our time. So it was, we can go on forever. I think there are.
I can do this forever. Pratna, please feel free to email me. And folks, anyone through Suresh or otherwise, feel free to email me. Happy to be helpful. We can do quick 15, 20-minute Zoom calls also to chat more and get into more stuff. I'm always happy to do, especially weekends. I have a couple of hours on weekends to do that.
He's the only one who says I'm a helper here on his profile. He's the guy whom you are talking to, right? So I can
happy to help all of you in any way, shape, or form possible.
Right.
So,
Gokul,
thank you.
I personally learned a lot more than what I would have learned. Really, thanks a lot for your amazing inputs. Thanks from all the student co-founders here, and a lot of them who are on YouTube here. Thanks a ton, and look forward to talking to you more. Right?
Thank you very much. Looking forward to it more. Thank you. Bye, Suresh. Bye, Arjun. Thank you, team. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.